This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Tonia Wellons has successfully straddled international development and locally oriented community-based development with full intention, skillfully borrowing lessons from one and applying them to the other. With 18 years of development experience, spanning senior leadership roles at the World Bank Group to social entrepreneur for a community-based social fund that she founded, Tonia is skilled in leading global development alliances, managing multi-donor operations, and engaging local communities. Tonia currently serves as Associate Director for the Office of Strategic Partnerships for the Peace Corps and is responsible for leading the agency's partnerships with government, the private sector, international NGOs, and the broader volunteer sending community. The OSP team is tasked with facilitating strategic opportunities that advance Peace Corps' mission and the role of volunteerism as a tool for development. Prior to Peace Corps, Tonia served as fund manager for CGAP, a multi-donor initiative focused on financial access and inclusion housed at the World Bank Group. She spent a significant part of her career working on USAID-funded capacity development initiatives during the immediate post-apartheid era in South Africa. Her work in South Africa with local government associations and city managers in the U.S. and South Africa successfully led to a pipeline of local talent for municipal leadership during this new democracy's most significant transition period. While living in South Africa, Tonia was able to leverage that experience to establish South-South partnerships with municipal government entities and partners in neighboring Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Swaziland. I spoke with Tonia in Washington, D.C. Hi there, Tonia. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to having the conversation with you.
And right now, it's the end of July. People are thinking about, being on summer vacation. Where are you sitting right now?
Well, I'm sitting on the 8th floor in Peace Corps' headquarters in Washington, D.C., and it's as busy as ever at Peace Corps.
That's cool. I hope that it's not too muggy of a summer, but, it's Washington, D.C. So
yeah, it's Washington, D.C.
So you're sitting at Peace Corps. You're currently the Associate Director for Strategic Partnerships. Tell us about what does that mean? What is it that you do? What are strategic partnerships for Peace Corps?
Great. So I have, I think, one of the best jobs, one in the world, but especially at Peace Corps. I get to engage with external stakeholders on behalf of the agency to identify if there are opportunities for us to work together and to collaborate. We manage the agency's relationships with other federal government agencies, with the international NGO community, with private sector players and corporations that are interested in corporate social responsibility activities, along with the fundraising and gift acceptance authority that Peace Corps has as an agency. I'm responsible for managing fundraising and partnerships at Peace Corps.
So it's a small portfolio, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's kind of small.
give me an example, a specific example of what's a strategic partnership, maybe with the corporate sector, or there's something you're excited about right now. Give me some details about that.
There are lots of things that are happening right now. I'll give you two examples. Peace Corps just launched a global MOU with Rotary International. For many years, Peace Corps and Rotary have worked collaboratively at Post on small projects, based on the interest or interest of a volunteer and the interest of a Rotarian that may have been, working or living in a specific country. This was happening so frequently, Stephen, that we decided that perhaps we need to take a step back and look at opportunities at a corporate level for Rotary and Peace Corps to identify mutual interest and overlapping goals, values, and missions. And there are just so many of the same goals when it comes to service and to providing community development support, that Peace Corps and Rotary decided that we would work together.
When you say you'll work together, does that mean that you recruit together, that you put programming together? That
it means that in countries where, or in communities where Peace Corps volunteers are working on a specific project, and Rotary might also be present in that community, that we're making a conscious effort to work together. So it might mean the volunteer identifying with the community what a specific need is, and Rotarians are either funding the project or using their volunteer manpower to help support or build a project if there is in fact building a latrine or building a school. But we've decided to be more strategic about working collaboratively in places where we overlap our service.
As you are sort of navigating this universe of strategic partnerships, and you've been with the Peace Corps a little over a year, is that correct right now?
A little less than a year.
A little less than a year. I knew it was right around a year. How are things different, and how is Peace Corps, finding different ways to meet the challenges in a world that's, more connected than ever, in a world that has less money than ever, all of that stuff?
That's actually a fantastic question. I've been in development now for a little over 20 years. And when I first started my career, I was an intern for USAID. So much of development assistance then was through country government. So it was through traditional development assistance funding, World Bank funding, USAID funding, country government funding. Now, I think there was a data point that I read a couple of years ago that now over 70% of development assistance is through private contributions. And that includes, private sector engagement, international NGOs, other development remittances, and other development assistance forms. So the world has changed significantly over the last 20 years, where so much work is done in development through partnerships, through collaborations. When you really talk about wanting to reach scale at a far more rapid pace than a traditional government entity would be able to do alone, it's really through partnerships and strategic collaborations that we're able to do this.
I love it when my interviewees tee me up for my next question so well. You said that you interned at USAID, many moons ago.
I did.
Are you one of these rare birds that knew that they wanted to be a development professional, from the start, or how did you find your way into this profession?
I wish I could claim that, Stephen. It just didn't happen that way for me. I was actually an education major my freshman year in college. And I went to North Carolina A&T, a small historically Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. One of the requirements was to take a practicum your first semester as an education major. Well, Stephen, I spent the semester with kindergartners and decided at the end of the semester that education was just not for me. And so I had a conversation with one of my professor, my advisor, and said, I wanted to eventually go to law school and be a lawyer. And he said, Tonia, there are too many lawyers out there already, and I just think that you're cut out for something different. You have a good way of engaging people. You're thinking about global issues. You ought to consider a career in international development. There aren't that many Blacks, African Americans in the space, and I just think you'd be good at it. That was all it really took for me to really start to think about it critically and to do a bit more research to find out what it meant to be an international development professional. So then the summer of my junior year, Stephen, USAID was on my campus, and I was invited to interview with them. And I was accepted for this internship, which took me to Colombo, Sri Lanka. I'd never been on an airplane. I'd never been out of the country.
Holy cow. And you went to Sri Lanka. I'm lucky enough to have been there, and that was a culture shock.
It was a culture shock and the best experience of my life. I still look at it now as one of the most significant things I'd ever done. Life-changing. It shaped me, and it shaped my family, and just really put me on a trajectory that I'm so grateful for, even to this day.
So now a potentially awkward question. Were you a Peace Corps volunteer?
I was not. No, it's not awkward. Not a volunteer yet.
Well played.
One of the things that I'm excited about is, Peace Corps is evergreen. You can join as a recent college graduate. You can join as a retiree. I'm looking at the other spectrum, the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, not to butt in, but I actually have two parents. Well, as everybody has two parents, but both of them are 70 years. Both of them are 70 years old, and they are recent returned Peace Corps volunteers from the country of Georgia. Believe it or not.
Exactly. I can believe it, and hopefully I'll be following their example.
Awesome. So you had this internship with AID. You came back, and then so how did it unfold from there? I mean, I'm trying to get us to the point where I really want to learn about Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund, but sort of take me through how that stumbled. You went from, you were at college, you went on this mind-blowing experience to Sri Lanka. Yeah. You came back. It looks like I know you spent some time at the World Bank, but then you went local. How did that work out? Yeah,
it's interesting, Stephen. There's so many commonalities between what happens in local communities in the U.S. and what happens in communities in developing and transitional countries. And I've always just I consider myself an international development professional, but I also consider myself a community development practitioner. And with that hat, I feel like I can work in either a developing country or community in Sri Lanka or South Africa, where I spent quite a bit of time, or I can work in my what's been my home for the last 19 years, Prince George's County, my home base for the last 19 years. I spent nearly a decade at the World Bank Group, and prior to that, working as a contractor for USAID. But I've always had this yearning to do something more significant in the place where I was living. Mm-hmm. And when you're traveling around the world working on interesting development projects, you don't always have the chance to do that. 2010,
So take me through it. So you're working for the World Bank Group, and then did you wake up one day and you said, you know what, I'm line in the sand, I'm making the leap, I'm going to start this foundation? This innovation fund, or how that work?
Like that, but there was a moment. I'll tell you about it. I was on a professional development program for the World Bank in Tbilisi, Georgia, former Soviet Republic. And while there was a story that broke about Prince George's County, a corruption scandal about Prince George's County. I was perhaps the only person in my group, it was a global training, that knew anything about Prince George's County. The county executive had gotten into a bit of trouble, and bribery and all kinds of things were happening. And I found myself sort of being the spokesperson in Tbilisi, Georgia, for Prince George's. That evening, I developed a concept note about ways of highlighting top talent in Prince George's County and really focusing on civic leadership and civic engagement in a place that I was calling my home. And I really wanted to figure out how I could shine a light on some of the more significant things that were happening, some of the people who were living there and working there but weren't capturing the spotlight. And just thought it was my sort of duty and responsibility to do that. I'd had the experience of civic engagement through my work in development, and thought that those were transferable skills that I could bring to my community, and I just did it. So I prepared the concept note, circulated to a local foundation. They thought it was incredibly interesting, and created the infrastructure for the Innovation Fund, which I did part-time as a volunteer for 2 years while still at the World Bank. And then I left the bank, ran it for a year and a half full time, and it's still thriving today.
So that was the part that, really vexes so many people. How do they start their own idea? How do they get out there and start their own NGO or their fund or their own movement or those kinds of things? And I'm always interested and glad to hear you tell the reality of, hey, you stayed at the World Bank for, you're sort of walking the fence for a while before you actually made the jump. Was there a moment, while you're walking the fence, was it just too much to handle both of the roles? Was it, you were kind of done at the bank, it was ready for, you're ready for the transition, and it was just good timing? Or was there something that happened at the Innovation Fund? What was the reason why you finally made the leap?
It was all of those things. One, I had a fantastic experience at the World Bank Group, and I knew that then at some point I would return there, but much, much later in life. And there were things that I wanted to do while I, consider myself still fairly young, Stephen. So
you're a spring chick, Tonia. You're spring chick.
Yeah, that's what I'm going for. So I left the bank again while the things were really, really, really at a high point for my work and my tenure at the bank. I left then, decided that I would take the time to really focus on something that I had developed a huge passion for. I used the time to grow the NGO, but also to focus on my family and my small kids. So it really worked out perfectly from a timing perspective to focus on the things that were really, really important to me, to build the organization up and then shift back to this wonderful opportunity that presented itself through Peace Corps.
One of the things that I'm becoming increasingly fascinated with is exiting from the NGOs, the social innovations, the social enterprises that are being started out there. We hear very little about that. How did you do that gracefully?
It's hard. It's still very challenging, quite frankly. One of the things that I did learn, I spent a bit of time studying nonprofit sector management, and one of the things that founders typically do is stay too long. Once the founder stays too long, it's really, really hard to properly transition an NGO to other leadership and have them as vested as you are as a founder. So I spent a lot of time during the year and a half where I ran it full time building an advisory board and engaging them in a useful and meaningful way that helped them to be as committed to the cause as I had become. That, along with finding a fantastic program manager to run the day-to-day business. But Stephen, it was really around being super strategic and making the NGO not my NGO, not Tonia's organization, but really a community asset. And I'd always had the position of, if this is no longer useful for the community, then we look for ways to wind it down and turn it over, or wind it down completely or turn it over to new hands. I still sit on the advisory board, very, very committed and passionate about the mission and the work that we're doing to engage the 21 to 45-year-old demographic, but also very, very mindful that if at some point this is no longer a community benefit, then you allow it to wind down.
You mentioned in there that one of the great aspects of doing that was being able to focus on your family, on your children.
Yeah.
Now that you've transitioned back into sort of what would be considered a pretty high-powered position here at the Peace Corps, how are you managing that? That's always a big topic, a conundrum for those of us in the development and aid world. There's travel involved. You're always on an airplane. There's long hours. There's huge demands. How are you managing that? Are there any strategies that you have to impart?
It's called prayer. Can I say that, Stephen?
Absolutely, of course.
And I'm often reminding my kids that remember that I took a year and a half and, spent that time running the nonprofit and spending lots of time with you, picking you up and dropping you off every day. It's just a lot to manage. I don't think that there's any other way to describe it except to, know that you need help, to call on friends and family to support you in this space and in this career, and then to look, to find good help. I think those are there's no recipe for success except to make yourself available. One of my colleagues at the bank shared this with me, and this one always sticks with me, is really making sure that, as a development professional, you're right, you're always on the road, you're flying, you're traveling quite a bit, but to make sure that you're there for the most important events or the things that your family members have identified as most important events. So it's, special field trips, play events, birthday parties, etc. To use technology to your benefit. My kids learned to Skype when they were 3 years old and 5 years old. As soon as Skype was available, they were using it. We use technology often to stay connected and communicate. They get the benefit of having, mobile phones at an early age because we have to stay in communication. But also just trying to figure out when you need to take pauses for balance, right? When you need to forego an opportunity so that you can be available, more readily available at critical points and times in your children's development and career development.
I know that's, my wife has some of the same issues. We have small children and she travels a lot. How do you deal with every event seems important? Every opportunity, every training, every project seems important. Is it just a matter of taking that stance and saying, what, there's always another opportunity, or is there a criteria that you have?
There are a few things. I spend a lot of time focused on the calendar, of course, right? There are a few key events for Peace Corps that I want to make sure that I am available for and available to represent the agency, especially when our director has asked me to take on something. And then I just try my best to balance that against the calendar at home to identify, critical moments, the beginning of school. I'm never traveling, during the first week of school or the week before school. I'm always available for a spring break. I'm always available for the last week of school. They're just, we know the high points of in a school cycle because we've done that before, but also identifying the key points in a work cycle and just making sure that you're able to balance it to the as much as you can. And when you can't, I'd say that family comes first. One
of the things that we, as development professionals and just in, as professionals in general, we're really good at talking about our successes. And something I always like to ask our guests is there a time that you can think of at any point in your career when you just sort of really fell flat on your face? You failed either at a project or through an initiative or through a business. And what were your strategies for picking yourself and dusting yourself off and keeping going?
That's a good question. I had an experience at the World Bank Group where the CEO of our group was leaving. The CEO left at a time where we were projecting a significant budget shortfall, and I was responsible. I was the COO for
literally handed you the basket.
Yeah, I did. It sat with me. The person that was the acting CEO was not responsible for that because they were serving in an interim role. And I was the person that was consistently there through the transition. We hired a new CEO who was coming in with, kind of big expectations because our group has such a strong reputation. But part of my first conversation with the person was really about this sort of structural shortfall that we were facing. And it was challenging. I felt like I had to carry the burden for the group. And I did carry it. I felt like it was my responsibility to communicate this, to own it, and to come up with a solution around how we find our way out. And I did. I had to propose staffing cuts and significant reallocation of project budgets. It was some of the hardest days that I'd ever seen, most stressful time that I'd ever experienced, Stephen. All the while trying to, demonstrate that the new CEO should have some confidence in my abilities. Mm-hmm. Not easy at all. But we managed, and we saw ourselves out within a 9-month period. I had to let go of some really, really good friends that I really admired their work. But when you looked at the business elements of what our unit needed, we just could not afford the staff. And we did it with grace. We did it gracefully. I think that was the most important thing, to make sure that you're managing your challenging situations with grace and transparency. And we came out on top. I mean, we ended up in a far better situation from a talent perspective and from a budget perspective when I was leaving, which is why I was able to leave on a high. And I had a very fantastic relationship with the CEO, the new CEO as I was leaving.
I want to sort of turn the corner for a second. As you're now entering, or I guess you're almost 6 months into this Director of Strategic Partnerships position. What's the biggest innovation or the biggest challenge that you're seeing in the development world today and in the response world today that either your partnerships are trying to account for or that you think the industry needs to innovate for?
If I could just respond based on kind of what Peace Corps is working on right now, and that's our initiative, the Let Girls Learn initiative, that we've been working with very closely with the Office of the First Lady. And it's really around removing the barriers for the 62 million girls around the world who are not in school. And we are incredibly excited about the opportunity to do something about that, to really focus on ways of collaborating with international NGOs, with the private sector, with our other governmental agencies around strategic interventions to get girls in school and to keep them in school. That, I think, Stephen, having a strategic focus, a specific development priority, and being able to galvanize public, private, nonprofit sector around that strategic intervention is an innovation. I think gone are the days, and this goes back to our earlier conversation, I think gone are the days of a single agency like Peace Corps or like USAID for that matter, going after a specific development challenge alone. We finally figured it out, that we're far more powerful by organizing through collective action and both galvanizing our resources, time, and talent towards tackling very strategic problems together.
We've found through these interviews, you're earlier this year, we published some information that was sort of a summary of these interviews. And one of the things that we found was that focusing on a particular topic, especially one that you can measure your success and you can sort of see that needle move over time, is extremely important to making sure that you maintain your sanity in this business.
Absolutely.
2 more questions for you. One of the things I love to ask is, you said you've been here, in the development world for about 20 years now. If you and I were, going to sit down, have a cup of coffee or a drink or glass of wine or whatever, what's your go-to story? About that crazy time you were sitting in Botswana doing something, or, you were in the Ukraine and this happened. What's your go-to story that you tell to either a new acquaintance or something like that?
Yeah, so there's several. Let me think. One go-to story is when I first arrived in Sri Lanka, I was incredibly homesick. I was asking myself, what in the world am I doing here? Why did I sign up for this? My girlfriends in college were having fun and they were partying and doing fun internships domestically. And I was in a developing country, in a rinky-dink hotel with a rickshaw driver taking me from the hotel to the aid office. What in the world am I doing here? I always tell that story to say that, the first 2 weeks were incredibly tough and challenging. And I was, very, very homesick. By the end of the first month, I had met a few people, had developed a few, go-to spots that I could always, find people, either other expatriates or local community friends that I developed. By the second month, I had my personal rickshaw driver who took me everywhere I needed to go. I'd made friends with most of our counterparts in international NGOs. I, knew most people in the town. They saw me coming and it was like, hey, Tonia, hi, Tonia, how are you doing? By month 3, I had a full understanding based on the project that I was working on of some of the challenges that USAID was facing and need to perhaps consider shifting. And, month 4, it was the end of my term there, and I did not want to leave. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of the arc of, wondering why you're there to sort of just knowing that there was so much more to do. And if I had a little more time, I probably would have been able to make a more significant impact than I actually did, which is, I think, part of the beauty of Peace Corps. Our volunteers are there for 2 full years. And it's a significant commitment when you think about it, perhaps as a young professional. But I think the benefit of it is just forever lasting. One of the stories that our director often tells is how she was at a meeting with foreign diplomats, of U.S. diplomats at the State Department. And, one of the questions that she often asks is, how many of you are returned Peace Corps volunteers? And these are U.S. ambassadors from around the world. And more than half the room raised their hand to say that they were returned Peace Corps volunteers. And while I didn't have the benefit just yet of serving as a volunteer, I have the pleasure of working with RPCVs every single day here at HQ and in our posts around the world. And it's just a remarkable opportunity to really, sharpen your skills or begin your skills as a development professional that you will take with you throughout the rest of your career in this space.
Absolutely. Last question is a question I ask every guest here on the Terms of Reference podcast, Tonia, and that is, if you're talking to an audience right now of individuals who are coming out of master's degrees, looking for that first gig in development or aid, and a good part of our audience also are transitioning from other careers in technology and engineering and whatever, looking to build a service career. What are your 1 or 2 pieces of advice about how to create that sustainability and that satisfaction in this career?
I think it's important especially for entry-level development professionals, to get comfortable with taking on the grunt work early in one's career. I think part of what motivates a person to pursue this work is the exciting parts of, the project management, creating an effort or leading an initiative, not necessarily some of the administrative work that's associated with development, the development business. I'd say be okay with the grunt work. Learn how to do the project administration, the meeting planning, the things that aren't so interesting or sexy as a young professional, particularly with a master's degree when you're coming out and you think you know everything already. Get comfortable with the stuff that's not so sexy and do it incredibly well, and then learn how to do it incredibly fast. Because once you're able to do that, you're gonna shorten the time that it takes to get to the other fun stuff, the more creative work, the work that has you in the field and in communities working on, pretty high level projects and administration. That's one thing. The other thing is that the pay isn't always great when you first start out. And that was one of I remember applying for jobs immediately after graduate school. And there was one that was with a nonprofit, and there was one in an international development organization. And the one with the international development organization actually paid less, but it was exactly the work that I wanted to be doing. And I had to make the hard choice of taking a job that paid less money than I thought I should, be earning with a newly minted master's degree. But, if it's in the space that you're interested in, and you just really have to look at the long road in terms of, the sacrifices you might make early on in order to reap a broader benefit later in your career.
Tonia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a delightful conversation.
It's been my pleasure, Stephen. I'm really, really excited to have had this conversation, and I hope we'll have a chance to do it again.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from 8preneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.